Welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by DraftKings. This is our best bets episode for the Ryder Cup, which tees off this week at the Black Course of Bethpage State Park in Farmingdale, New York. Home soil has meant so much at the Ryder Cup, with the host winning the last 5 times convincingly. Will we see a repeat of the miracle at Medina, or is the U.S. poised to defend its home turf as a minus 140 favorite? I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and I'm joined by 2 golf betting aficionados who are going to answer that question and more. First up, we got Kyle Murray of Roto Grinders. You can find him over at X at KMurrayDFS. And Spencer Aguiar returns from Roto Baller. He's also on X at Tee Off Sports. You can find both of them in the Action Network app. Follow their bets throughout the week with the same handle. So go ahead and make sure that you have your notifications turned on there because they are market movers. We're going to consult both of their models today, talk about the biggest betting opportunities of the week here at the Ryder Cup. But before we dive into those best bets, let me tee you up, Spencer, in this way. What makes this event special, and why is it so different in terms of the twists and turns, the specialty markets of betting this exact event as opposed to a regular week where you have, tournament play starting on a Thursday, individual competitors, none of that team element? How different is this for you? Do you have to get out of a certain mindset? Do you look at different numbers? How do you attack something like this from day one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's challenging. The overall problem to this is you're betting on an event here where, at least at this moment, as all of us are recording, everything is purely speculative and in this hypothetical process that's being undergone right now. Like, I'm still going to break down the course in a similar fashion for my model to how I would for any run-of-the-mill tournament. I want to see how players actually fit this tournament. However, the problem is that every outlook is kind of followed by this immediate unknown variable that enters the mix. Like, I can tell you who the 12 players are on each team, but from there, I can't tell you as we record today who's playing together. I can't tell you who they're playing against for any of those matchups. In fairness, I think those two things I can get around because grading a player compared to the course is always going to remain pretty similar to a regular week, but where that deviates from me is the mystery that follows of we don't even know for some of these specialty markets, as you just talked about, Michael, like if someone is going to be active for any given match or how often they might actually play. So we're going to get these back-to-back days to start the event on Friday and Saturday. It's going to be best ball and alternate shot. Only 8 of the 12 players are going to be teeing it up for either portion on each squad. That's then followed on Sunday by all 12 golfers in singles action. There are clearly going to be some projections that we can make, like a player like Rory McIlroy or Scotty Scheffler. They're going to play more frequently than some of these names on the bottom of the list, like Rasmus Højgaard may. But that's the unfortunate downside to this process. Like, as much as Kyle or myself would love to come on here and have like really detailed out bullet points, and I'd love to hear his theory on this, but like at the end of the day, the two of us are not captains for these squads. If we were, it'd be a lot easier to tell everyone how often someone would play, who they'd be partnered with. And I think all of that alone would make extrapolating out projections much easier. And we would have more clarity to the situation. But, unfortunately, like our data minds are not going to be able to tell Keegan Bradley or Luke Donald what to do this weekend. They're going to have their own team in place, what they're doing. And unless you have inside information to what's actually going on inside their brains, it's speculative at this point.
Kyle, do you agree that it's so difficult? Sometimes you just have to take your historical data and place it aside, or perhaps lean more aggressively on the historical data of how Ryder Cups have unfolded, not just the winner and the loser and the deciding margin, but also the ebb and flow day one, day two, the runs that these teams go on, and the opportunities that are presented in the market when one side is up and is decidedly in an advantageous position. Is that the time to come in and start betting the other side?
Yeah, I think for me, like this is probably the most unique, betting event because honestly, during the standard weekly events, I don't do a ton of live betting. Like I probably should even do more than I actually do. But for this, I think this is the best kind of golf market to bet live, especially, Spencer alluded to, knowing the matchups. I think from a modeling perspective, obviously we're going to do what we can. But for me, I kind of broke down the course, sort of tried to project a player's skill set based on the course and sort of how they sort of rank within, the other players that are playing this week. But after that, it gets kind of murky because, again, we don't know the matchups. We don't know who's going to be even playing a set amount of matches. And even the course data is pretty limited. I mean, it's not a course that we see all the time anyway. I know we do have a good amount of data, so we can still utilize it to the best of our ability, but there's a lot more sort of angles and narratives to play in the Ryder Cup than typically I do for any sort of betting stuff. I like to sort of push all that stuff to the side and focus on the numbers and what the models are telling me. But this week, I do think it adds a little bit more fun to that because it allows more of the narratives. Like one of the plays I'll give out, it's kind of like a fun long shot play that I think is more of an angle to shoot. So I think there's more angle shooting than I'm typically used to in the golf betting streets, but it's certainly one of my favorite events to watch, and obviously something that I have circled on the calendar for a year out or so plus. So I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully we can get some winners out here.
Even here, as we record on Monday afternoon, there's plenty on the menu. It's only going to grow as we go deeper into the week leading up to the start of this. You got, outrights, which team has the lead after day one, day two, exact outcomes, margin of victory, specific points scored by each golfer. So let's start with your favorite play as it stands right now on the board. I'll kick it to you first, Spencer. It looks like you're taking a side here right from the get-go.
I really like what Kyle just said. I just want to circle back to this and we'll get into the pick because as both of these two things kind of go together, I agree with Kyle. I am not a trends better. I don't think trends are overly important. And I think the problem when you look at trends betting is that the market reacts to a lot of that very heavily. And a lot of times you're not getting the value that you think you're getting in those spots. But this is a unique situation. And so I'm going to take the USA to win here at minus 150. You can find that at some spots where ties equal no bet there. You got to be very careful about how you bet this because if you're looking at just like to hold the cup or to win the cup at the end, if it's a tie, Europe's going to retain the cup. So it's something to keep in mind if you're actually going to bet the USA squad here. But a lot of these answers, as I keep saying, it's going to come down to this projective nature that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to break this down in two different ways of how I ended up on this USA ticket actually holding value. So the first thing is I ran projections for these two teams if both managers made optimal decisions every single chance that they got. Now, we know that's not going to be true, but my math thought the USA should win, give or take, about 53.5% of the time. So from a pure mathematical perspective there, it's only about minus 115 if you're trying to find true odds of what that price should be. So at the bare minimum, technically, Europe is probably the better value based off of that number, depending on the margin of error that you use in some of those two things. But I think the counterintuitive answer that I want to talk about it, and this may be the thing that is this hypothetical that is really, really tough to gauge. And you talked about this, Michael, during your breakdown of what has happened historically at some of these Ryder Cups in the past. I added a home course advantage because there is this indisputable edge that teams get on home soil. What that advantage is going to be more subjective to the process. I looked at the NFL for a general point of reference, just was curious to see what some of that looked like. Home teams in 2024 for regular season games had about a 6.6% advantage. That totals down exponentially from a decade ago. There were times in the NFL, if you look at like the early 2000s and before, like some of that data was 15 to 20%. But where you see that take this massive spike, even inside the NFL, is during the playoff games. The home teams there win about 75 to 85% of the time. And while it's going to be difficult because we don't have as many games to be able to pull from as we would during an NFL season, if you just look at golf specifically, 10 of the last 12 winners since 1999 have won on home soil. You talked about there being this handful in a row that have gone back and forth. So I think there's definitely an edge here when you do get a team on home soil. I don't think it hurts at the USA when I ran projections for this course, had the two best players in Scotty Scheffler and Bryson DeChambeau. So if you're really trying to find how do you get from that 53.5% edge up about 6% more to actually make this value and into a bigger territory there, I don't think it's that difficult when we look at this home field or home course advantage answer to find that 6% edge that comes into play. How much it actually is, that's the dangerous part that you have to be careful of. But I would say the home field or home course advantage is probably 10% plus. And I mean, I think that's enough to make the USA here a little bit of a value if you're looking to take a side on one of the two wagers.
Now, buried in that detailed, thoughtful response was that, at least on paper, there seems to be an advantage in terms of what's being offered in the market value-wise on the European side of things. It looks like that you want to take advantage of that in a particular market. Kyle, walk me through it.
Yeah, so I think real quick, the home field advantage thing is so unique to golf, just because these guys aren't used to the sort of atmosphere that they step into in the Ryder Cup. I mean, when you compare it to football, like Spencer did, at least to some extent, these guys have been playing in these sorts of environments, roughly, whether it's through college or through just regular season games. But for golf, it's a whole different atmosphere. So I think the one thing for me when I was trying to assess these teams and break down the just kind of the entire rosters of both sides was just the upside of each unit, as if it were going to be specifically an entire team, because again, it is difficult right now on Monday to project who's going to be playing in which matches and who's going to be in which group. So for me, I'm looking at the first day and the second group, and I'm taking Europe on the second group in the foursomes at plus 160 over on DraftKings. This strictly comes down to the fact that, again, I do think it's difficult to project out who's going to be exactly playing here. Obviously, we have a good idea. These teams are going to be playing a few of their best players in every single match possible. But for me, I think the USA is actually the more volatile team here, which I think will benefit them in terms of their upside. And I think that will actually help them in the four balls. But in the foursomes, I think that Europe actually sets up to be a more consistent team. So I like them here at plus 160. And there's some added value in that day one, that second grouping. And I also think that they're the deeper team here. I think the USA actually has the better team top to bottom, or sorry, the top end of their roster, especially from a course fit perspective. But in terms of the entirety of their team, where we might see these captains go to the deeper parts of the roster for this second half of the day one matches, I do think that Europe has a slight advantage here, not only in the foursomes format, but also in that second round of matches where maybe we're seeing a few more unique names rather than just the top 8 guys. So that's where I'm seeing some value at plus 160 for Europe there in that second match in the foursomes on day one.
We got 4 more picks to get to from our guys here, but before we move on, don't forget to sign up for the award-winning Action Network app and Action Pro specifically for real-time pick alerts from the NFL season from experts like Brandon Anderson, Chris Raybon, Stuckey, and our entire Action Network team. Plus, you can access our pro projections powered by Sean Kerner and our predictive analytics team. Just go to actionnetwork.com/pro and get $20 off the annual price when you use the promo code POD20. So don't miss out on the best bets at the best prices. Visit actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20 to get $20 off a year of Action Pro. All right, let's get back to the action here. Spencer, your second best bet. You mentioned this guy by name earlier. Let's talk Scotty Scheffler and how best to attack him on the board here this week.
Yeah, so Scotty Scheffler to be the first man out in singles for the USA. That's a plus 265 number over on DraftKings. And if you compare that to the rest of the market, that's closer into that like plus 150 range at almost any other book that you're looking at. So you're definitely getting value based off of the other books there. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know in any of these spots how Keegan Bradley's going to play this situation. But my only theory is that Scheffler's odds to go out first should probably be better than the general perception, just because of how singles is set up for Sunday. So if you look at the President's Cup, both captains alternate picks. They get the ability to try to get the best perceived opponent that they can. This is not a blind process that takes place during the President's Cup. So there's a strategy that comes into play. You flip that around here at the Ryder Cup. All picks are made in secrecy. They're revealed on Saturday night. I might be overthinking this matter ever so slightly, but I just don't see the purpose in not sending Scheffler out first. He's the best player in the world. I would just put him out there and say, you know what, whoever you want to face him, just put him against. We're going to take our point. And if you want to try to, and I do think Europe is probably most likely to throw a name like Jon Rahm out there. I don't know if Rory necessarily wants this Scotty thing. Like we've seen how he's faltered in the past against him. But if they do want to throw Rory, well, just give us your best. We're going to give you our best, and we'll take our chances on what's going to happen there. So I thought the plus 265 number was a really good price. I mean, if you're looking for another name that at least makes some sense on it, maybe Bryson DeChambeau at plus 450. I think he is a guy that can get people going and get the crowd into this from the very early morning match. But it's hard for me to imagine that there's too many names on this team if you're just revealing it in secrecy with it. it's probably those two. And I mean, like the wild card to the mix would be Justin Thomas, but I just don't think the USA is going to do that necessarily. Feels more like the name that would be sent out early on Friday as the first guy to hit a ball, not to actually end this tournament. So I'll take Scotty Scheffler plus 265.
A call back to the top two golfers. First, your play on Scotty. Kyle, you're coming in with play on Bryson DeChambeau.
Yeah, obviously Bryson here is a guy I'm looking at. I like him to be a top 3 USA point scorer, plus 125 over on DraftKings. When kind of projecting out all these players on a per course basis and how they, fit for the spot, it's tough to overlook Bryson. Obviously, Bethpage Black, everyone knows how important distance is going to be here. And, surely we know Bryson is not lacking in that category. So it comes down to, bottom line, Bryson's the best fit from a driving perspective on this course. Again, I do think he's another golfer that fits into that mold of volatility, but he's also just been one of the most dominant golfers in the world. So I don't mind backing him here to be a top 3 scorer for the USA, especially they're a team that I think could easily, rotate guys out. Again, I mentioned that they are pretty top heavy, in my opinion, with their top 3-4 options, but at the back end, we might see some rotation guys, being moved in and out throughout these matches over the 3 days. So I do think that these top 2 consistent guys, even Scotty in this market, I think is a good bet because we know that these guys are going to be out there for all their matches. When you look at Bryson and his history in the Ryder Cup, last time we saw him in the Ryder Cup was 2021 at Whistling Straits, and he was dominant, 2-0-1 in Whistling Straits, and I think that he potentially probably was even shorthanded a little bit in terms of how many matches he played. And then obviously when you look at his performance in 2018, he obviously did not bring his best game in that road Ryder Cup where he did not win a match in that was the Paris Ryder Cup in 2018. So I do think that there's a little bit of a value here based on maybe some narratives of Bryson not necessarily being a top Ryder Cup performer. But bottom line is over the past 2-3 years, he's been an elite golfer, and I'm happy to back him here to be a top 3 point scorer for the U.S.
This is an event that's made for television. It brings in a lot of casual fans. I think some may be surprised that Ben Griffin is actually the 13th rated golfer in the world. And Spencer, you have a particular market that you'd like him to exceed expectations in.
I do, and I think a lot of it kind of stems from what Kyle has talked about just through the overall team outlook of the USA and what we see over with Europe. So I don't disagree. Like Scotty's my number 1 player for this course. Bryson's number 2. You look at the next 6 names on the board, it's 5 European golfers followed by a USA golfer in Xander. And I think from there, where the USA gets this advantage is they have a lot of players between that like 9 and 15 range that are interchangeable between matchups. And I really like Ben Griffin here. There is a market out in the space where you can take an over-under position of how many points he's going to get. The over-under number is 1. It's minus 138, so you got to pay a little juice, but I like the over on that. I had a discussion during the President's Cup where I took Russell Henley for him to be the top rookie scorer. It was an 8.5 to 1 number. And I don't think this is quite the pristine opportunity because I think Henley had everything hit his way with that. He drew Scotty Scheffler as a partner. Everything went right. But there is some hope when we look at what optimal pairings are and what might actually happen. I think there's a chance, not saying it's a strong likelihood, but I do think there's a chance that he gets Bryson DeChambeau as his partner. And I think if you get Bryson immediately, that over under 1 number is a really nice spot for him. I think he's a great alternate shot player to begin with that you can fit into this. Like my hope is that he plays both of those 2 days and he gets a Sunday singles match. So if you could tell me today that he has 3 opportunities to play, which is not going to be a given, I think this over under 1 number is a really, really great value to be found. If unfortunately this goes in the opposite direction and he has a Sunday singles and maybe plays one other time, this gets a little bit sketchier of what the value is. But I just think when you're looking at pure value of what the market is looking at these players, and you just brought it up, Michael, like I think he's a legitimate top 10 player when you look at both teams here of what we are getting. And I don't think the market is necessarily showing that when you look at a lot of these different areas. And this is the easiest one to project out because, well, I can't tell you what Keegan Bradley's going to do throughout the entirety of it. If you can give me a weak number like 1 here, I mean, look, just win a singles match on Sunday and we already have a push out of it and just get me a half point somewhere else. So yeah, I like Ben Griffin here a lot. I think a lot of people see this like middling distance that he has and doesn't necessarily think Bethpage Black to be the best course for him. But I disagree. I think Ben Griffin here is probably the best American value on the board.
I'll speak for myself here. I'm going to be at this event on Friday. I like to go into something like this with a lot of different bets, like to spread out my risk. But it's always nice when you have a long shot, anything north of 10 to 1 in your pocket, because it can wipe away all the mistakes, all the gambling sins of the week, and leave you in the black. And I like that we're ending this episode with Kyle's pick, a 12 to 1 shot to be the top U.S. point scorer. Who have you circled?
Yeah, so again, a lot more angles and narratives come into play in the Ryder Cup for me, and especially from looking to obviously we bet outrights all the time, so we're not necessarily strangers to these long shots. But top USA point scorer, I'm looking at Cam Young, 12 to 1. For me, I was basically just looking for a guy a little bit down the board who I thought could play his way into maybe earning some more matches there in day two, and I think Cam Young is a guy that can do that. And in terms of again the volatility that we're seeing on the USA side, at least in my model, for some of these guys in their individual matchups, and then obviously in these team matchups as well. I think Cam Young benefits from that as well. He's been a guy who has performed well in match play in the past. Obviously, very limited sample size, so you don't want to go and get too carried away with that. But Cam Young is a guy who I think also fits this course very well. He has the ability to absolutely bomb the ball. He's in some great form as well. He played his way into this spot here, and he really needed it down the stretch. There was really no room for error in terms of making this team. I also think there's a couple guys in this USA team that might not play much at all. I mean, when you look at the last Ryder Cup where we saw a guy like Ricky Fowler go out there, he played a single match and he played in just one other match. There's actually probably 2 or 3 guys who are live on this USA team to have that sort of outcome. I don't think Cam Young is one of those guys. Obviously, when you're looking at somebody trying to project how many points they can go out there and score, you need them out there for matches. We need at least 3 to 4 matches here for Cam Young. So again, obviously need him to either be highly efficient when he's out there or just play his way into as many opportunities for points as possible. Again, I like Cam Young quite a bit. I think he's going to be one of those guys that gets paired up well with somebody who might suit his game a bit more. And the volatility actually plays his way into his favor in a market like this where you're looking for a top-end finish at 12 to 1 for Cam Young to be the top point scorer for the USA.
Thanks for listening to the Best Bets episode for the 2025 Ryder Cup here on the Action Network podcast presented by DraftKings. We appreciate you tuning in as we snuck some golf into your regularly scheduled NFL programming. Don't worry, all that will be up next as the week continues, so you can count on us to give you all the football you can handle. Best of luck with all your bets as always, and we'll see you back here next time on the Action Network podcast.